those different addresses end up coming up. Class A would be representative of a IP address that is less than 126. So if you had an IP address that's 126.1.1.1, that would be a Class A address. Whereas if you had an IP address that is 190.1.1.1, that would be a Class B address. A Class C address might be something like 220.1.1.1. And keep that in mind. Each one of these, as we're kind of moving through these, you can see that there's limited amounts of different domains, and based off of the different domains, you can create either a massive amount of hosts or a very limited amount of hosts. So keep that in mind as well when you're going through and researching this a little bit further. Some things to think about here before we jump into a little bit of subnetting is a host address of all ones is called a broadcast address. Broadcast address. So if you have an IP address that is set to, the last octet is set to all ones or 255 in most cases, then that's going to send out a broadcast message to the entire network, letting everybody know that, hey, I need you to communicate back to me. I'm sending out a broadcast. So if it's all ones, it's considered a broadcast on the network, whereas a host address of 0 is reserved for the wire. So usually you don't use 0 because typically that is associated for the wire. So 255 or the host address of all ones is reserved for broadcast. Host address of all zeros is reserved for the wire. So if we're just in a layperson's network here, again, I don't want to get too complicated. I know some of you are chomping at the bit here. If I had a 192.168.1.255, that would be, in a simplest form, a broadcast address. If I had a 192.168.1.0, that is reserved for the wire. And so we're not supposed to use these addresses right here. These are reserved IP addresses. And I'll talk about how you get all ones here on the next slide, I believe. So there was a time, we're going to talk about subnets here in a second. There was a time, and I think that there still is a time, that we may end up running out of IP version 4 addresses, which are the Class A, B, C, and D that I just talked about. And there's been a push to move to IP version 6, which is 128-bit. And instead of a 32-bit, it's 128-bit. So it gives us significantly more IP addresses to work with, and typically is automatically assigned when the DHCP is assigning IP version 4. So usually nodes on the network will not only get an IP version 4 address, but they'll also get an assigned